The following presentation on the D-Day landings took place on June 6, 2024, the 80th anniversary of the landings. The two presenters, Walter Gursky and Jason Janicek, are not only knowledgeable speakers but have a true passion for the source material. We hope their passion is as evident to you as it was to everyone in attendance that day. We appreciate your interest and attention. Thank you for watching.
Real quick, looking at the weather outside, we have some concerns for this operation, so we're going to postpone it, and we'll reconvene in 12 hours and let you know what's going on. So, actually, that's just a little D-Day humor. We'll get into that, because they did do a postponement.
Landing zone, Oscar.
Can anyone hear me without the microphone?
Yeah.
Sound man, are we okay? Good. But yeah, there'll be more of that tonight. If you think dad jokes are bad, you haven't heard history nerds say jokes. So if it sounds like a joke, you can laugh because it's probably meant to be funny. But no, thank you for everyone coming tonight. Thank you for that opening, Tom. First, I'll just introduce ourselves. My co-presenter and co-researcher, Walter Gursky, Vice Commander of the Sons of the American Legion here, grandson of a D-Day veteran that you'll learn about later, and a very, very knowledgeable World War II area. I'm just here for my witty repartee. He's here for the knowledge.
All right, this is Jason Janicek. He is the commander of VFW Post 690. He is also a recent graduate with a Master's in Military History from American University.
A little bit of what we're going to do tonight. It's not going to be a straight up just regurgitating historical facts. We're going to try to make it interesting. We're going to barely scratch the surface of the actual history of D-Day. There's so much. I mean, you can see some of our sources. This is only a fraction of some of the source materials we looked through in the last 6 months or so. But we're going to give you an overview of Overlord, focusing on the American participation, and we're going to tie in the Schwaming Bay community to some of those key moments and stuff like that, and recognize some of our local families and stuff. So hopefully everyone enjoyed the evening. Hopefully everyone got some snacks to eat and stuff. So anything else?
I think we're good to go.
Except I will introduce one other staff. I forgot to introduce our videographer, Jeremy Carmen, in the back, also with the Sons of the American Legion. Jeremy, raise your hand. So there you go. Oh.
Will the video be available for purchase?
It won't be available for purchase, but it will be available for free on YouTube once we get it up. But we will gladly take whatever you think it's worth. So yeah, it will be on YouTube. Whenever Jeremy and Walter, they're the smart ones, can edit it. I mean, everyone has full-time jobs, so we try to get this up as we can. But yes, it will be up on YouTube, and you'll see an announcement for it if you're on Facebook. Walter's site, Hear Myself Talk History. My site, Marching Through History. We'll put those YouTube videos on there, or you can probably Google it. Ashland D-Day, Hear Myself Talk History on there. But yes, it will be. So without further ado.
All right, well, let's commence. So, Operation Overlord, 80th anniversary, June 6th, 1944. So, we have to start kind of at the beginning here to get our context. So September 1st, 1939 was when the German military crossed the border and invaded Poland. This was the final line which resulted in the British and French governments declaring war on Germany after almost a decade of appeasement. Things would then continue to escalate. June of 1940, France falls to the Germans. This is a massive upset. This surprises everyone. As many jokes as may exist about the French today, the fact of the matter was that they were considered one of the preeminent military powers in Europe, and the fact that they were completely overrun in just under 2 months was a profound shock around the world. Operation Barbarosa, June 1941. After their failure to overcome British air defenses, the Germans turned east and launched an invasion of the Soviet Union. This is at the time the largest ground campaign in military history. The Germans begin to push deep into the USSR with massive casualties on the part of the Red Army. However, they are not able to defeat the Soviet Union and become embroiled in a morass of war of attrition on that front. December 1941, after the Japanese Empire launches a surprise attack on the United States at Pearl Harbor, Germany decides to declare war on the United States, thus bringing this to a point of being a true global war. Battle of El Alamein, 1942, November. This represents the first really major defeat of the Germans by the Western powers. So this takes place in North Africa and sees them finally being pushed back out of Egypt and into Libya. It is followed by Operation Torch, November 1942. This is going to be the first time American troops go into action on the ground against the Germans in this conflict, invading Vichy, North Africa, Vichy, France being a puppet state that was set up in France by the Germans after the fall of France proper. Battle of Stalingrad, December 1942. The German 6th Army is surrounded and destroyed in the city of Stalingrad on the banks of the Volga. This is a defeat from which they will really never be able to recover. Operation Husky, July 1943. The United States and the British military begin an invasion of Sicily. This is really the final straw in the tottering fascist regime in Italy and causes the Italian government to collapse. This is followed by subsequent operations on the Italian peninsula, but this once again gets bogged down due to the harsh terrain being very favorable to the defenders. And July 1943, we have the Battle of Kursk on the Eastern Front. This is essentially the Germans attempting to regain the initiative after the disaster at Stalingrad. However, in this pitched battle of basically two forces putting their most powerful units against each other, the Germans lose. And we now have them on what is going to be an unstoppable retreat back to their own border. Which means at this point in the war, we only have two primary active fronts in the European theater. We have the Italian front and we have the Eastern Front. The Western Front, which would be France, Belgium, the Low Countries, etc., these areas are considered more or less a backwater at this time, but we are going to see that change very rapidly.
Okay, right now we're talking about the Atlantic Wall. This is Hitler's fortification for him defending the Western Front. Obviously, he's focused mostly on Russia right now. They don't know where the Allies are going to come, but they know we're coming. This has been a policy initiative since the beginning that we're going to open that second front. So we have German fortification all along the Atlantic coast from the Spanish border all the way up to the Arctic Circle, basically in Norway. They're varied in strength. They're recycling a lot of things that you can see up here. They have recycled battleship guns that they're placing casements. Obsolete captured tanks turned into stacked defenses. They're using a lot of captured artillery pieces and weapons captured on the Russian front, captured from the French and stuff in these. And it's obviously extremely costly, both resources, both materials and men. That's a lot of concrete and wire and area to cover. So obviously the heaviest fortifications, like the picture you have up there, those size fortifications aren't what is going to be attacked during D-Day. That's up farther up on the line of the French coast, the Pas-de-Calais, if I pronounce it right. He's better at the foreign pronunciations than I am. Where that made the most tactical sense strategic sense to invade. And that's where Hitler's high command were convinced, even after D-Day commenced, that the Allies were going to come. Okay, Normandy itself, Normandy Coast is where they identified that right away. It's not in summer 43 probably. Yeah. They identified that right away. One of the key advantages is one, it was not as heavily fortified as that Pas-de-Calais area. Sorry, it was more lightly defended, and it was the shortest cross-channel trip for the Allies to make. As you can see right there in his notes, they anticipated an attack further east on the Pas-de-Calais. Most of the German units, not all, most of the German units in the Normandy area are going to be reservists, not frontline material troops, except with one distinction.
Actually, I just want to point out here in our photograph, actually, this is an example thereof. That is actually a German Luftwaffe infantryman. So he is actually an airman of the German Air Force. But he has been pressed into ground service, and actually you can't really tell that it's actually a machine gun that has been salvaged from an aircraft that he's using at this time. So it's kind of a good example of just the kind of troops that you have in large numbers in this area. Again, it's mostly reservists, it's people from other services that maybe don't have. So the Germans are having a very hard time keeping things like their Air Force functional at this point, having a hard time keeping their planes in the air, they have a very hard time getting fuel. They essentially have a lot of people that are doing this kind of role that are well suited for garrison duties in what is, again, at this time, kind of a backwater. They do tend to rotate troops in from the Eastern Front for R&R as well, and they're kind of mixed around with all these units. But it's an interesting photograph that just kind of demonstrates that is actually in Normandy.
All right, I'll just, SHAFE, this is Supreme Headquarters Allied Expeditionary Force. This is the joint command that's going to be in charge of this. The overall command of this invasion. U.S. General Dwight David Eisenhower is selected. He took the command in January of 1944 with the task of overseeing this cross-channel invasion. He was always considered, what did MacArthur call him, a first-rate clerk at one point? Yes. General MacArthur in the Southwest Pacific at one time had said he was a good officer and he was a first-rate clerk. General Eisenhower's best attribute, I think, was his ability to get people to work together. There is a lot of personalities in this command structure.
If I may just throw out a tidbit that actually I'd heard. I have heard that my own grandfather, who we will be talking about shortly, had referred to Eisenhower as being more a politician than a soldier. However, in this situation, that is actually exactly what you need, because as Jason was just saying, we have all these very strong personalities that are involved. Not just Eisenhower, we've got the likes of George S. Patton and Bernard Montgomery, to name just a couple. So someone who's able to wrangle all these personalities and actually maintain a coherent operational unit that is going to be able to take on the German military is no small accomplishment.
So what year and month are we right now?
Well, right now we're, like I said, General Eisenhower was assigned to the command of SHAFE in January of 1944. So 6 months before the actual invasion. And originally they were looking, what, May-ish? So I don't know. So we're still looking, they still haven't set a firm date for D-Day. So this would be, the planning is in kind of its running phase right now. So this would be winter 43 going into 44 right now. No, go ahead. Does anyone? Okay, never mind. Go ahead.
All right, so this is going to be our first local connection we're going to talk about real quick. Now, he's only involved kind of on the. It's an interesting situation. He's not directly involved in the invasion itself per se, but he is the Presidential Chief of Staff. This is Admiral William D. Leahy. Now, the Presidential Chief of Staff is a position that does not exist anymore. Today, we would call it the Chairman of the Joint Chiefs. Essentially, he is the highest-ranking military official in the country. He is second only to President Roosevelt. An interesting tidbit that I always say is that once you look for him, you're probably going to start seeing him in many famous pictures of Roosevelt. For example, the famous conference at Yalta where you have the picture of the big three, Roosevelt, Churchill, and Stalin. Admiral Ley is standing right behind them. And Admiral Ley is actually, he is not originally from Ashland. He moved here as a child, but he grew up here, and he did graduate from Ashland High School in class of 1892. So again, he's a close friend of President Roosevelt and is considered second only to him in policy. There are even some who argue that he was almost a shadow president during the last few months of Roosevelt's life as his health declined. He wrote this, one of his biggest things with this is that he was constantly clashing with Army Chief of Staff General George C. Marshall over when the invasion should occur. Marshall wanted to attack as quickly as possible, whereas Leahy was more in favor of building up American forces and power in Britain to ensure the operation was successful. And again, because Leahy had such a good relationship with the president, which is really in many ways kind of a polar opposite of that Marshall enjoyed with the president, Leahy won out, and that was why we end up with the invasion taking place in June of 1944 as opposed to in 1943. Now, an interesting point is that on D-Day, he's actually going to be speaking at a commencement in Iowa. And this is a specific choice. This is because they do not want him to be anywhere that it looks important during this, because they know that German spies are going to be watching. So their logic is that the Germans will think there is no way that the invasion is going to commence when the most important man in the American military structure is off speaking at a college graduation ceremony. So he has his own small part to play directly in the deception operations as well.
Well, it's a pretty neat connection to Ashland, considering that the highest, I mean, he is the highest ranking individual in uniform in the United States military, graduated from Ashland High School, obviously a few years before most of us.
So just real fast, we just got some by the numbers here of what is actually slated for the invasion. So we have got airborne forces, so that's going to be your paratroopers and also glider-borne assault troops. And what we have there, we have 2 U.S. and 1 British airborne division have been tasked for the invasion. A naval fleet of 5,000 ships, give or take. Well, more give actually, there's a few more extra, but the numbers all say 5,000. So, an infantry division, we have 4 U.S. infantry divisions, plus 2 British and 1 Canadian are going to be landing across the different beaches. We also have various armored units that are going to be deploying. This is just an interesting point to bring up. They have various unconventional tank designs that are going to be showing up here, all based on standard ones. They actually come off of the British General Percy Hobart's designs, and they refer to them thus as, the British in particular, as Hobart's funnies, because they're rather odd-looking designs. The most famous is actually going to be, it's a standard Sherman tank, which has been modified with inflatable canvas skirts and is designed so that it can actually float and drive itself in. They've essentially modified this tank to make it amphibious. It's an interesting design, and the fact of the matter is, it does work, except when it does not. And that's kind of the problem there, because when it doesn't work, it doesn't work. Because as soon as some water gets in there, it's a tank, and it floats like one would expect a tank to float. So, but nonetheless, it is an innovative way to try to get armor in to the beach itself.
Could you tell us how many soldiers there would be combined with all 3 of those Canadian, British, and U.S. forces?
Off the top of my head, I actually do not have a solid number. I have moved through several sources, and stuff tends to be rather conflictory. I'm not sure if Jason maybe has a better estimate than I would.
As you know, because like I said, that numbers, I can't tell you right now. I'll get that for you. But no, it's a significant number. I know we had we'll get that number for sure. I don't want to give you an incorrect number or a guess.
Yes. So, and again, I apologize. I just frankly I've got too many numbers floating around in my head, and depending on what book you read, there's always subtle differences. So it's kind of all over the place. And so for air support, I'm just going to touch real quick too. We have 2 U.S. Air Forces attached. The U.S. 8th Air Force and the U.S. 9th Air Force are all both attached here. And this is going to include everything from heavy strategic bombers like the famous B-17 Flying Fortress to attack aircraft and to fighters. And actually, an interesting note about fighters is that one of the actually predecessor units to the 148th Fighter Wing, which operates out of Duluth and does flybys for us at our parade, we're actually flying P-38 fighters as top cover during the invasion.
Just to answer your question, I was going to guess 150,000, but I didn't want to guess. A real quick check of one of my sources had 160,000 combined troops with them. But I think 70-some thousand being American. Well, I should say United States, because Canadians, I don't know if they get upset if I say American.
And just our photograph here real quick. This is just showing how the actual landing craft, in this case the iconic American Higgins boats, were actually loaded. These men with their full combat loads would have to scale down these cargo nets, usually in pitching seas, to get into these boats. So that's more just, again, that's the photograph itself there.
And one thing we'll talk about later is the fact that one of the problems with D-Day, one of the planning problems, was the individual soldiers' load for those invasion forces was too great. They went in too heavily encumbered especially the initial wave, so that was an issue. Now would be a good time to maybe mention something that's neat about the 8th Air Force and the commander. Who all was here 2 years ago at our George Barr presentation? We have a couple repeat customers? Good. Well, obviously, 1942 April, Lieutenant Colonel Doolittle, everyone remember the premise of that, led that raid onto against Tokyo, and we had talked about that a couple years ago. Lieutenant Colonel Doolittle came back from China, got the Medal of Honor, got promoted. He is now, just over 2 years later, a lieutenant general. He is the commander of that 8th Air Force. So he's in charge, he's in tactical control of the bombing campaigns and the air campaigns. So there's a familiar name right there. It's kind of maybe it's a small war, I don't know, but yeah. So just 2 years ago, he's a lieutenant colonel. Now he's a lieutenant general, which is quite a big, significant jump up there. But yeah, so we heard about him a couple years ago, and now he's back again, controlling the air war in Europe. So.
All right, so now we're just going to have a quick look at what's happening on the other side, specifically in the Führer headquarters, which would be, of course, Hitler's headquarters. What's going on at the top level of the German High Command. So Hitler and the rest of the OKW, the Hochkommando des Wehrmacht, which would be, again, their high command, is going to be, they have relocated from the Wolf's Lair, which is a bunker complex in East Prussia, to the Berghof, which is on the Obersalzberg in Austria. Because what they are doing is he knows that there is going to be a major move in the west. So Hitler has decided to move all the top command somewhere more centrally located because he knows what's coming. He's personally actually fluctuating because he has generally very firmly believed that the invasion will hit the Pas-de-Calais. Other times, however, he thinks maybe it's going to hit elsewhere. He does actually flirt with the idea that it might come at Normandy. This is not really of any help, though, because it generally doesn't amount to anything. And if it does amount to anything, it essentially is just German units being needlessly redeployed on a fairly regular basis, making sure that they are never fully set up where they should be. And on the night of June 5th, he actually stays up late having a party with Propaganda Minister Joseph Goebbels, watching a propaganda film and basically just sitting up in the night, reminiscing about old times up at the famous Eagle's Nest. So he's up very late, which means he's probably going to sleep late, and that may be a little bit of foreboding or foreshadowing.
He's also not the only person that, well, he's sleeping in, somebody else is, because our field commander at the time, Ern Rommel, is not present. Ern Rommel, we had mentioned earlier, is in charge here. Did we mention his name yet?
No, he's coming in.
Oh, never mind. We'll get to that. Go ahead.
He's spoiling it all for you. There he is. So, the defenders of Normandy, that's actually our photograph right there. That is General Erwin Rommel, the famous Desert Fox. That is him on the right inspecting some German armored forces. They are with it's actually an interesting example real quick, just to talk about, again, some of these interesting vehicles and stuff that they're using. Because actually, and the name of it is escaping me right now, and I apologize for that. But that's actually a modified, I do believe that is a Czech tank that was captured before the war. It's been modified into a tank destroyer with a large gun mount and a casemate. This is the kind of stuff, there's a lot of this on the Western Front. Again, it's old, obsolete stuff that's been modified and that they are throwing into use into some other role because essentially it's just a way to fill those ranks because again, that meat grinder on the Eastern Front is consuming material and personnel at an absolutely appalling rate. So German forces in northern France, again, they are under the command of Rommel. Most German units in Normandy are of lower quality. However, the 352nd Infantry Division is stationed at Omaha Beach. And this is actually a mixture of green, but regular Army troops, and Eastern Front veterans. Additional units are stationed further inland. This includes a rapid reaction force. This is where most of the panzer forces, in other words the tanks, they are mostly stationed in and around Caen. There are also, the city of Caen, by the way, of course, it's actually the largest city in the area. It's behind what's going to end up being the British invasion beaches. We also have German paratrooper units that are stationed along the Cotentin Peninsula, which again, these are a far cry from the lower quality units that we had mentioned that do make up the bulk of the garrison troops around Normandy.
Can I just make a comment for 3 seconds? Allied intelligence was actually pretty good. They're getting a lot of photographs. They're photographing the beaches. They're photographing the inland country. But there is, I would consider, 2 glaring mistakes, 2 glaring failures of Allied intelligence. And one of them dealt with the 352nd Infantry Division. Because up until they actually encountered them, Allied intelligence did not have the 352nd Division out on Omaha Beach. They were inland according to intelligence estimates. Was the 716th supposed to be there?
I believe so, yes.
The 716th was in there, and the 352nd is probably as close as you can get to a first-class, trained, equipped, solid, first-rank fighting division on this Western Front. So when they hit the beaches, they were not expecting a unit of that caliber there. So that was a failure of Allied intelligence, because they had been up there since for quite a while.
They had been up there for some time. They've been rotated in, replacing again. It's a combination of static infantry divisions, which is a German term for garrison troops. Again, these are going to be mostly, these are reservists. These are guys that are kind of getting a bit old, and they probably would have aged out of service in peacetime. It's going to be people who are basically walking wounded that have been rotated in from the Russian front. That's what they're expecting to be there. They're not expecting, again, because what the 352nd is, it's kind of like what I was mentioning again, because they like to rotate units in and or reform them, and that's what it is. We have mostly green, but they are fully trained German Army regulars mixed in with veterans, especially NCOs, veterans from the Eastern Front. So these guys, they know what they're doing, and they're very capable at doing it.
They would have an impact.
All right, preparations.
Okay, preparations. England has basically been transitioned into a gigantic training camp. Some units, like the 29th Division, have essentially been there for almost a year and a half. The 1st Infantry Division was pulled out of Sicily, brought here to train. The 101st Airborne Division, who hasn't seen combat yet, is in England, and it's essentially one large American training camp. They have built up assault training facilities all across the country. They've identified beaches that have some of the same characteristics as the French coastline and stuff. So we're and the rehearsal landings. Let me talk about that here. Slapton Sands is along the coastline of England, and that's where they're doing a lot of their landings. They land, they get out, the troops would go through all the rehearsals, they start getting the nitty-gritty of what they're going to actually be doing when they actually invade France. Because Allied intelligence, like I said, the Allied intelligence was mostly good, other than a couple of those things, but they've got scale model sand tables of the beaches and the fortifications. So when guys are going through the rehearsals, they're attacking their casements and stuff that they're probably going to need to be seeing and stuff. April 1944, again, this is all highly secret. April 1944, they're in full rehearsals here. And again, these are all contested waters because, you know, the German Navy is still out there. I guess this is another intelligence failure. A group of German E-boats, or torpedo boats, got into one of these rehearsals with all these LSTs, these landing ship tanks, which are very large, cumbersome troop and vehicle transporters. So these small, fast German torpedo boats got into one of these rehearsals and wreaked incredible havoc. Hundreds, 400? 400 some odd soldiers died from being torpedoed and sunk. And it was actually kept secret for years, even after the war. Operation Exercise Tiger just shows that not all the casualties happened in combat. I mean, you lose 400 to 500 soldiers in an incident like that, that's kind of, I mean, someone's going to notice. I mean, what does the government tell the families? You know, your loved one died in combat operations, the European theater of operations. That's all you get. You don't know that he died in a practice mission by German torpedo boats that never should have been there. One of the units that we're going to talk about later, from the 29th Division, had just completed their exercise, and the next iteration through was the one that got attacked on torpedo.
No, LST, that's the big one or the little one?
The big one, the landing ship tank is the large ones.
Okay.
Yeah.
It's the large one. It's got the doors on the front that open to let vehicles drive out.
Yeah, that's the one that can, that's transoceanic, you can cross, you know.
Also, is there a map?
Towards the end we do.
Yes, we have, toward the end, we do have a map of Europe itself. We actually have a printed situation map, and we weren't able to find a place to stick it up, but we do have it in the history room. Now, the reason Patton was selected is kind of the same reason that Admiral Ley had been sent to go do something else during this invasion. The Germans know Patton. They know who he is. They know he's one of the best combat commanders that the United States has in the theater. So, of course, if this army group is there and Patton is commanding it, it must be important. Unfortunately, this is not the case. Most of the tanks are inflatable, and the trucks are driving back and forth while radio operators talk to each other about trivialities in code. And this is what is producing the illusion of there being an army massing at Dover, directly across from the Pas-de-Calais.
And correct me if I'm wrong, it was this unit that just very recently got recognized. Didn't their veterans get the Congressional Gold Medal just a couple years ago?
Yes and no. I'm trying to remember what it's basically, they were the predecessor to it, and they got a new name and reorganized after they got on the continent that did these interception operations. And the name is escaping me right now. It's not exactly the, I believe it was the first United States Army group is what they called this one. And it reorganized into something else once they got ashore. And forgive me, it is escaping me what they renamed it.
And obviously, like the next bullet we're just talking about, we're continuing massive aerial bombardments now there's a little bit of a war at the upper level too between strategic and tactical, because the strategic thinkers at the high levels of the Army Air Forces, they want to keep bombing strategically Germany, the marshalling yards, the oil reservoir, the oil refineries and stuff like that. They don't want to do the tactical bombing, so there's that war up front. But Eisenhower is winning out. But another I don't like that echo, sorry. Another wrinkle in this is they can't lay all their ordnance on the targeted beaches. Because why? Then the Germans will get an idea that's where they're coming. So they're actually bombing, part of the deception campaign that I consider is bombing all up and down there.
They're hitting the entire French
So
coast.
because they don't want to give away, so they're wasting a lot of munitions. And then we're going to find out that these bombardments weren't as effective as we would hope they would be.
The other thing, of course, is that there is ongoing insurgent resistance in France against German occupation. And the Allies in Britain have been coordinating with them for years. They are now working with them to increase their attacks, which are severely straining the German logistical capabilities. It's also forcing the Germans to have to remove yet more troops from the actual invasion areas to try to secure these areas deeper into the country itself. There are also special operations units comprised of a mixture of American and British operatives that are being inserted into the continent to organize and lead them.
And one of, I just mentioned the Jedburgh team. They call those the Jedburgh teams. Those small units, 3-4 teams of 3 or 4, basically forerunners of special operations, had parachuted into France. This is where you get all your wacky gadgets and some of your innovative guns and stuff with the Jedburgh teams. Again, they're the forerunners of what today we would call special operations. And about a couple months ago, in our lead up to this, we had done an interview with Major John Plaster. He's a Vietnam veteran. He lives over in Iron River. He's in Northwoods, and he had served with the SOG teams as a Green Beret in Vietnam. One of his battalion commanders was a Jedburgh veteran of World War II, which I thought was kind of neat. When we were talking to him about some history of D-Day, I thought that was kind of a neat tie. Another interesting thing was how the Allies communicated with the French resistance. They communicated over the open airwaves, coded messages over the BBC, you know, a certain line read from a certain poem or song played at a certain time meant something. So there was a code word that went out that when the invasion was going to happen, that the French resistance were expected to do certain things. So they used the open airwaves to communicate with the French resistance. So now we're getting closer to D-Day. We're in the spring of 1944. I just got a few notes here. I kind of did some ganders in the National Daily Press about what's going on locally here, because life is still going on back here. One big news in the Ashland area, they're still doing on the 3rd and 4th bond drives. That's how we funded the war, has been doing bond drives. But we had Major Dick Bong and Alf Anderson were in town. Dick Bong, everyone's heard of that name? Who's all heard of Alf Anderson? Alf Anderson's famous because he was probably one of the highest decorated enlisted air crewmen in the Pacific Theater, and he's from Ashland too. Other things are going on politically. We have a huge labor dispute. The railway companies are threatening to strike in the country. Here we're in the middle of the war. Ashland County courts are in the middle of a big murder trial because there's a murder out of Glidden, which is Joseph McCulley. Some of you may recognize that name. The World War I veteran, the first commander of the American Legion Post, and a retired judge, was reappointed to the judge-ship. General Doolittle was reassigned to the 8th Air Force, and so all those things are happening through the same time frame too. And the last thing that I had circled, Pappy Boyington went missing in action in January of '44. He was a famous Marine Corps aviator in the Pacific. Baba Black Sheep, that TV show, some of you remember that. Charlie Chaplin, everyone know who he is. He was facing what was considered by a high-profile sensationalist criminal trial out in New York under the Mann Act, which I believe the Mann Act had to do with transporting women across state lines for nefarious purposes. But those are just some of the things that were going on while we're building up. So, like, life is still going on in the United States. Like, we still have people breaking law. We still have, you know, they're doing the fundraising drives. We still have that war in the Pacific and stuff. So those are just some of the news headlines that were going on here in northern Wisconsin and the United States.
All right, and now, so we've gotten through our preparatory phase, so now we can get into Operation Overlord itself. After several weather-related delays, the weather over southern England and the English Channel famously unpredictable, the decision is made, the forecast is favorable. Eisenhower gives the word go, which sets in motion this enormous machine that has been built up for years in Britain. So now, I would just like to ask you all to just play along with me, humor me for a little bit as I go on an insane rant about what it was like sitting in one of these aircraft. So let's just imagine that we are sitting with our backs against a cold metal wall, sitting along a bench seat, the droning of those piston engines, all we can hear, nothing but pitch black outside and nothing but dim red lamps along the ceiling as we are flying our way toward what is very likely going to be the end of many of our lives, but also the beginning of one of the most important operations in all of history. And we are going to touch more on him as we get forward, but there is one individual who's on these aircraft who's of special note. He is a divisional chaplain with the 82nd Airborne Division who wrote a famous prayer that is still used to this day as the paratroopers' prayer. Before the war, he actually had been a minister at St. Andrew's Episcopal Church here in Ashland. And we are going to have, our member Brian Linton is going to be reading that for us now.
Almighty God, our Heavenly Father, who art above us and beneath us, within and around us, drive from the minds of our paratroops any fear of the space in which thou art ever present. Give them confidence in the strength of thine everlasting arms to uphold them. Endure them with clear minds and pure hearts, that they may participate worthily in the victory which this nation must achieve in thy name through thy will. Make them heartily soldiers of our country, hardy soldiers of our country, as well as thy Son, our Savior, Jesus Christ. Amen.
Thank you, Brian. And I'd just like to remark also that Brian also has, we have a relative of his that we are going to be talking about that was also serving with the 82nd Airborne during this invasion, and Brian himself also served with the 101st Airborne Division during his own time in the service.
This is one of the maps we have. This is an actual period map of the coastline of France. You can see up top here, this is the English Channel up here. England, the coast of England is up here. I know it's kind of hard to see. So we're actually going to be attacking south. We always think about going from France to England, you're going from west to east, but they're actually going south across the channel there. And this is that coast.
Potemkin Peninsula.
Thank you. Potemkin Peninsula over here. But this is the line of beaches right here that we're going to be assaulting on. I know the map is kind of hard to see, but we have a copy of it in our history room back there. And like I said, the neat thing about these are actual period maps that we had reprinted.
Yeah, those are both from the U.S. National Archives. Those are the actual situation maps from June 6, 1944.
I don't know how we can... We're just going to...
Unfortunately, we had tried to stick those up at the front of the room,
Just go ahead and kind of pass them down and take a look at it.
So,
Just be careful with them. I'm not sure, but I mean they're not originals or copies, but we'll just pass them around, just take a glance at them as we're talking.
just to make sure I understand, that peninsula is where they thought it was going to happen.
No, so the Cotentin Peninsula is to the west. The
Yeah.
Pas-de-Calais is going to be actually to the east. So
Quite
it will be
a-
on the
Right
right
off the map.
hand of the map, yes.
Quite a ways. I'm trying to put it in perspective here. I'm going to say you're going to be where my hand is going to be up here more. So it is quite a ways down the coast. So
20 miles?
oh no, more than that. Quite a ways.
All right, so we're just going to touch real quick. We're going to talk first about the British landings, and again, we are going to have a primary focus on the Americans, but we are going to talk about what the British were doing as well. So the British are going to be operating, it's going to be Operation Tonga. So, oops, I hit it too many times. But anyway, so they're going to be on the eastern flank of the invasion, again, around that city of Caen. You're going to be hearing that word a lot, because again, the city of Caen is the primary objective for the British side of this invasion, because that essentially is the main objective on the eastern flank of the Normandy area. So bridges are to be secured across the Orne River and the Caen Canal. These are primarily to stop the rapid reaction forces I had mentioned earlier, the German panzer units that are stationed around Caen and to the south, from being able to reach the bridges. If they can take these bridges, they can prevent them from reaching the beachhead. I'm sorry. So that is our primary objective there. And of course, the one over the Caen Canal would actually achieve a good deal of fame later as Pegasus Bridge, after it was taken in a daring and very effective glider assault by British forces. Also notably during this operation is the first Allied casualty of Operation Overlord, as one of these British glidermen is killed at Pegasus Bridge.
Yeah, it was an officer. I forget his first name. Paul, I should, but Lieutenant Brotherton. I think he was with what was the company? D Company of the battalion. The British have goofy names for the battalions, their regiments. I can't remember it. The
The Oxenbucks, yeah.
The Oxenbucks of the 6th Airborne Division, under John Howard, Major John Howard. Yeah, Lieutenant Brotherton was the first casualty of the liberation of France, I guess you would call it.
So additionally, another major objective is the Germans have a heavy coastal gun battery at Merville. And this threatens the naval operations approaching the British beaches. These are heavy coastal artillery. And coastal artillery is basically, these are heavy guns meant to destroy ships. So they have a major battery there. And so the British aren't able to destroy the Merville battery. They actually are able to put together essentially an ad hoc unit, because in what is going to become a recurring theme here, the drops are very scattered. So instead of having the full strength that they plan to have with a second wave landing gliders directly on top of the battery, the second wave just never even gets there. And the first wave is so scattered that in the end, Lieutenant Colonel Terrence Otway, commanding that operation, has to essentially just cobble together what he can out of the handful of men that he's got. But they managed to complete their mission.
I can just add something to the airborne. Again, we said we're not going to spend a lot of time on the British. I mean, I really wanted to talk about Pegasus Bridge, but one thing about Pegasus Bridge, it has become, the British have identified it as their most consequential part of D-Day. When they had the 50th anniversary and countries are deciding where they're going to have their celebrations, the British decided to do it at Pegasus Bridge. What they did there, the glider troops, exactly what their glider troops, they're in basically motorless planes that are towed by Lancaster bombers, cut loose, and they literally land, crash land these gliders right on top of the German garrison there, literally between where the Germans are sleeping up. Get their way out of their gliders. Some of them land so hard that the troops are actually knocked unconscious for several minutes.
Actually, in one case, too, the British Horsa glider has a tricycle-style landing gear, meaning it has two in the rear, one in the front. And actually, some of them land hard enough that it's documented that sometimes that front landing gear would actually get rammed up through the floor of the aircraft upon hitting, which was rather unpleasant for those who
And
received
there's
the
there's 2 points I want to make here, and then we're going to move on. So we actually get to the American beaches and stuff. We talked about, this is light infantry, airborne light infantry. One of the things they have to do, they're going to be a holding force for an expected armored counterattack. But the way the German command is, there's very tight controls on releasing those armored vehicles. It has to come from the German High Command, i.e. Hitler's office himself, before those panzers could move. This light infantry company is sitting on these bridges waiting to be run over by tanks when just down the road there is a regiment of panzers gassed up, ready to go. I forget the guy's name. I read his memoirs. He became really good friends with Stephen Ambrose, that German commander, von Luck. Hans von Luck. Hans von Luck is a very, I guess he's not a Rommel, but he's considered a very experienced, capable British armored officer. He is sitting with his regiment just miles and miles away from these light infantrymen with his tanks running, but with the strict regulations in place by Hitler, the control freak kind of, can I call him that? Yeah. He can't move, so an opportunity was lost for the Germans there, thankfully, because I think they would have probably gone right over these light infantrymen before the rest of their follow-on forces got up to them. And will this be a time to mention Rommel's asparagus?
So another just quick point I want to throw out there. One thing I want to just mention, I'm a collector of military. I like military equipment, weaponry, etc. And it just is an interesting note when he talks about that, when Jason mentions about how they got those tanks coming. What the British had as an anti-tank weapon is called the PIAT, the Projector Infantry Anti-Tank. Now, this is not what we would consider today to be a rocket launcher, RPG, bazooka, whatever you want to call it. This is a spring-loaded abomination that only works at very close range. So they would have to let the tank practically run them over before they gave it their one shot and hoped for the best. So just to help to put it in there effectively, they are with a giant, they are sitting at these beaches with essentially giant Nerf guns to try to go after these tanks. And actually, I feel like this is another just real quick point to get into about the German defenses, because we mentioned Rommel. Now, there's actually been some argument within their own command and about the deployment of the panzers. Specifically, Rommel wants to use the tanks immediately. He believes the tanks need to be thrown against the beachheads immediately as soon as the landing takes place, because he knows that the United States and the British have total air supremacy. Once a foothold has been achieved on the beach, Allied air power is going to make those panzers a moot point. So he wants to throw them into the sea immediately. And remember, Rommel is experienced from his fighting in North Africa. He knows the way the Americans and the British fight. He knows that's going to be the best way to deal with them, and really the only way. Whereas Leo von Schweppenborg, who is the commander of that Rapid Reaction Panzer Force, he has more of the old school mindset. He wants to let the beachhead be created so that he can then surround it and destroy it with his panzers, which again, hindsight tells us for sure, Rommel definitely was right, because once things got going again, the German panzer forces were immobilized and destroyed by the overwhelming Allied air power.
Which is something Rommel learned in North Africa. And the tight controls they had on releasing the panzers, I think probably made Adolf Hitler one of the best Allied generals for Overlord. But no, but seriously though, some of his control measures actually aided us in that way.
So now we're going to talk real quick about Chaplain George B. Wood. So again, that's a photograph of him there. I do believe this is at Normandy. It's wearing his jump uniform. Not the best quality photograph, but he has his chaplain's helmet with the cross on it. And he also has his 82nd Airborne Division patch. So again, he was actually the minister at St. Andrew's Episcopal Church here in town. He had left in 1940. So the connection's relatively minor, but it is certainly there. And he is, at this point in the war, he is now a divisional chaplain for the 82nd Airborne Division. And he is also the only chaplain to make 4 combat jumps in the war, because every combat jump that was made by the 82nd Airborne Division, Chaplain Wood jumped with them. And he authored the Airborne Prayer, which we heard earlier. So again, a nice note, just an interesting note here of someone who actually has a connection to the area.
Do you have any Episcopalians in here? No, I don't know. Okay, I thought it would be a neat connection for people, but okay.
Operation Neptune, the American airborne landings. U.S. Airborne is being deployed on the western flank of the invasion with an eye on isolating the Potemkin Peninsula and the vital port of Cherbourg. The capture of a deep water port is the most important initial objective of the invasion, because although they do have plans on how they can essentially make do with Normandy, it's not going to last for long with the size of the force that they are planning to bring ashore. Also, of course, the Germans do have more units in the Potemkin Peninsula, so if they can isolate the access points of that, they are thus cutting off more routes to reinforce the beachheads. These landing zones are primarily behind Utah Beach and are positioned also to secure the routes needed to link it with Omaha Beach. Drops are scattered and disorganized. This is one of the biggest problems with this operation. They end up dropping, their sticks end up dropped all over, and the units end up completely scattered and disorganized. However, they are able to, much like what happened with the British Merville Battery, but really on a larger scale in this case, although that's primarily because the Americans have more paratroopers, whereas the British were more reliant on gliders. Instead, thus the Americans are able to begin forming ad hoc units and begin to accomplish their objectives. For the most part, they're finding the Germans' response is very confused. Another interesting note is actually, again, part of the deception, is that dummies are also being dropped a ways away from the actual landing zones, which are resulting in German units being mobilized to respond and driving out to find a field full of mannequins, and while the actual paratroopers are landing and taking their objectives. So frankly, it's a large amount of confusion happening in the night. We also have, again, we mentioned about overloading. This is an issue the paratroopers have too. Many of them are landing in the flooded fields. The Germans have opened up floodgates and flooded large areas along the coast to impede invasion. They're drowning in these fields. They're also having problems too. Someone had the brilliant idea that they would place a large amount of their equipment in a bag that would be attached to the right leg. It turns out that placing a very heavy bag on your leg is not a good idea when you want to run. It's also not good to land on and break your leg. It's just one of those things that's kind of hard to wrap your head around who even thought that one was a good idea. But I need airborne comment real quick. Another aspect of D-Day, we've all seen the airplanes. For D-Day, they marked the airplanes with their invasion stripes, and we did that for a reason. Previous airborne drops, of the 2 units, 82nd is the only one that has combat jump experience. And we'll go back down to the Mediterranean theater. When they came into Sicily, a lot of American paratroopers, their C-47s were shot down by the United States Navy, because the Navy was skittish. They had a lot of attacks by the German aviation forces. So if you're in the airplane in the air, you're getting shot at by a lot of nervous gunners on Navy ships. So a lot of C-47 transports got shot down by U.S. Navy ships in the Mediterranean. Also, pilots are still a little, I don't know how many, we have an estimate of how many gliders probably landed in the Mediterranean because the pilots cut them loose early. Off the top of my head, I don't remember, which is rather embarrassing because I just did a talk on Operation Husky about 2 months ago. But it was fairly high, and again, when you have overloaded soldiers that are flying in plywood gliders, essentially plywood boxes, dropping them at sea is pretty much a death sentence.
Yeah.
So,
and that's due to nervous pilots, inexperienced pilots. A little bit of that same experience here. The flak was so heavy that a lot of the pilots were going too fast. They're hitting the green jump light over the wrong areas. So that's why we have paratroopers that are leaving the planes at too fast of a speed and over the wrong areas. So that's why they're scattered all the heck won't have it. Right?
so now we're going to talk about another local figure. I'm going to let Jason take this one.
Okay. Bruce Prentice, or most everyone knows him as Culver Prentice, Dr. Prentice. Who here remembers stories of Dr. Prentice? A lot of people? Yes. Everyone of a certain age in Ashland has a Dr. Prentice story. Do we have any family members of Dr. Prentice here? Oh, hello. I just got some of this information lately, so I actually don't know a lot about his military service, so maybe afterwards you can help me up a little bit. But Sergeant Prentice was in the 9th Troop Carrier Command, which is basically transport. They had C-47s hauling paratroopers, C-47s, they're hauling gliders. Oops. Obviously, and after the war, we all know he came home to be a well-known local physician. His grandson has a well-stocked scrapbook that we're able to go through. We're going to go through some of these. Here are American troops working on a damaged glider. I don't know if you can see that really well. Again, these are just flimsy cardboard or plywood things that when they crash landed, you usually had to have a lot of repairs being done.
Canvas skin and a plywood frame.
Yeah. Sometimes when gliders landed, the troops would actually cut their way out the sides to get out. There is Dr. Prentice. I know he's not a doctor there, but I just feel like I have to call him Dr. Prentice. Here is a picture of C-47s with gliders and transport. These are actually the gliders that are being towed by them. This is from D-Day. You can see the invasion stripe, so we know this is Operation Overlord. This is a British glider, a Horsa glider, generally considered better constructed than the American Waco glider.
If I could throw out just an interesting note, these were fairly recently acquired by the United States Army Air Force, which you can actually tell if you look at that, because you can see the U.S. star and bars there. You can also see the large British roundel, which if you ever see the British aircraft, it almost looks like a bullseye. It's a red, white, and blue roundel. You can actually see that painted over. That's that round circle in front of the invasion service. Just an interesting note about that photograph.
Okay, just 101st loading up.
Boarding C-47s, and here's a couple shots inside. The scene that I was very ineptly trying to conjure into the mind before we started here.
I'm assuming, because he actually names this gentleman here, that he's a friend of his. Do the family members know anything about the gentleman that he named? It's just curious, kind of a mystery. I mean, in some way, shape, or form.
Jason, what is the name that's on that
Dick
photograph?
Kemsky.
Again?
Kemsky.
No, I don't remember him mentioning it.
Well, I'm assuming it's your father. This is his
Yeah.
daughter here. Raise your hand. I'm assuming it was your father writing in the scrapbook.
Yes, yes.
Just another picture from inside. So
These are all 101st Airborne Division paratroopers. You can see the iconic Screaming Eagle patch on their sleeves.
And like I said, I didn't have enough time between a lot of other things and work to actually dig too deep into the service history. But whatever his job was with the 9th Troop Area Command, he was able to take a lot of pictures. And this is just an example that his grandson had in this scrapbook too, of the German phrase book that they handed out to all the soldiers. No different. They're still doing that today. When I went to Iraq, the Army issued us Arabic phrase books, learn Iraqi culture books. So the Army does the exact same thing today. They're about the same size, same reference numbers and everything. He did. I know that he survived the war, obviously, because he came back to be a doctor. He was wounded in January in Belgium, if I remember right. So he did leave the European theater alive, but with the Purple Heart. Okay, U.S. glider operations, we're going to talk about them. Like you said, the British had more gliders, but the United States did have some gliders as well too. Initial landings occur at night, because that's when the airborne forces went in behind the lines. Reinforcements landed in the afternoon of June 6th. Gliders.
This would include operations Kilcook and Elmira. I'm not sure how to pronounce the first one, so I apologize. But so these were supply operations. This is when the heavy equipment was brought in, because again, these paratroopers, these are essentially light infantry. So this is when they're able to bring in some of the heavy equipment, which is still light, but this is when we start seeing things like field guns, anti-tank guns, jeeps, things like that are getting brought in by these cargo gliders.
And to show how dangerous they are, the 101st Airborne Division, their assistant division commander, was killed on his glider because his glider was too heavy. The pilot couldn't control it, and it crashed, and I believe a vehicle came forward and killed the general. Was it Don? I can't remember his name. The museum at Fort Campbell is named after him, but he's the assistant division commander. As we're going to learn when we get to the beaches, which will be sometime tonight, don't worry. When we get to the beaches, we'll learn how important assistant division commanders are.
All right, so here we have another local connection. This is going to be Yalmer Okanen, went by Okie. So he was Brian's uncle? Great uncle. Great uncle.
Do you have any other family members here? Raise your hand.
All right, thank you for coming. And so, he was originally from Ironwood, Michigan, and served as an artilleryman with Eagle Battery's 319th Glider Field Artillery. So, as I mentioned with Operation Elmira there, he was connected with that. So that would be bringing in, again, these heavy weapons. These would include M1 37mm anti-tank guns and M1 75mm pack howitzers. As a side note, something that one will discover when you are dealing with American military equipment of the Second World War and thereabouts, there is an absolutely obscene amount of items that are all known as the M1. So the list goes on and on and on. So, yes, they land during Operation Elmira to provide support to the 82nd Airborne Division in their operations there. And he operated an M1 pack howitzer, as discussed. I thought we had another one on there, but I also have, so I apologize for that. But he also operated an anti-tank role, which most likely would have been with the M1 37mm. However, most of these gunners would be cross-trained, so essentially you pick up what you go, you pick up what you get and you go. So a little bit of both, and of course with the aforementioned German armored forces being a major threat that the airborne is expected to try to contain, that's an extremely important role in this operation.
And if you're interested in learning more about Okie, we'll call him Okie, Brian subjected himself to an oral interview session with Walter and I, and that's up on YouTube. Again, you can either go to his Facebook site or mine. We'll give those sites out again at the end, or how to Google it. But there's about a 20-minute oral interview with Brian going over some of his family research into his military record.
It can also be found on YouTube as well.
Yeah. So.
Okay. All right, so once again, I'm going to have to ask you to bear with me. Because now we're going to envision that imagine yourself on a ship, heaving and pitching through a dark night. As far as the eye can see in any direction, there are more ships. These range from huge warships down to small wooden-hulled minesweepers. Men are crammed onto all of these boats, and again, sailing to an uncertain fate. Through the distance, the song "Road to the Isles" can be heard as a British Scottish division's piper stands at the fantail of his ship and plays the pipes. As they approach the Normandy coast, the speakers crackle into life, and the voice of the Supreme Commander of the Allied Expeditionary Force, Dwight D. Eisenhower, reads off his order of the day, which will become one of the most famous speeches in history. And if our post member John Coball, we have asked him to step up and read that order for us today. Hold on. Oh, I'm so sorry.
Soldiers, sailors, and airmen of the Allied Expeditionary Force, you are about to embark upon the great crusade toward which we have striven these many months. The eyes of the world are upon you. The hopes and prayers of liberty-loving people everywhere march with you. In company with our brave allies and brothers in arms on other fronts, you will bring about the destruction of the German war machine, the elimination of Nazi tyranny over the suppressed people of Europe, and security for ourselves in a free world. Your task will not be an easy one. Your enemy is well trained, well equipped, and battle hardened. He will fight savagely. But this is the year 1944. Much has happened since Nazi triumphs of 1940 and 41. The United Nations have inflicted upon the Germans great defeats in open battle, man to man. Our air offensive has seriously reduced their strength in the air and their capacity to wage war on the ground. Our home front has given us an overwhelming superiority in weapons and munitions of war, and placed at our disposal great reserves of trained fighting men. The tide has turned. The free men of the world are marching together to victory. I have full confidence in your courage, devotion to duty, and skill in battle. We will accept nothing less than full victory. Good luck. Let us beseech the blessing of Almighty God upon this great and noble undertaking. The first day of June 6th, D-Day, 9,000 casualties on a 50-mile stretch of beach along the Normandy coast. That's what happened there. After the first day, the beach was actually secured. The troops that came in after didn't have the bitter fighting that the first wave had. My uncle was in the first wave. He was killed there. Thank you.
Thank you, Jim.
I've heard that John's going to have the first John much like Scott was for that.
All right, so the invasion fleet itself. Allied forces have assembled an armada to land and support Overlord. The total strength is over 5,000 vessels, from massive battleships to, again, tiny wooden minesweepers that are supposed to lead the way. 6 battleships, 4 monitors, which are essentially less maneuverable battleships. 23 cruisers and 104 destroyers are forming an escort force for it. And this enormous fleet is moving across. Once sighted by the Germans, one defender remarked that it looked like an enormous city on the sea. Amongst this city on the sea, we have the United States ship Bayfield, APA-33. This is the only ship in the United States Navy's history to be named after Bayfield County, Wisconsin, and is the lead ship of her class. It's an attack transport, so its job is to bring troops into these type of operations and then deploy the landing craft directly. She is going to be serving as the command ship for operations at Utah Beach. She's also the flagship for the Coast Guard's Task Force Oscar 1. Coast Guard is going to be performing an extremely important operation during this as well, as actually most of the landing craft operators are actually going to be from the United States Coast Guard. Now we do have here, very generously provided by the Bayfield Heritage Association, we actually have the original ensign from the USS Bayfield here on display. And that ship actually did go on to have a very storied career, continuing on through with World War II. It would actually serve with the invasion of southern France later in the summer of 1944, before transiting to the Pacific in time to serve with the invasion of Iwo Jima in 1945. Later on, it would go on to Korea, where it would serve as a ship supporting the Incheon landings, and ending its career actually operating off of Vietnam, including supporting landing operations at Da Nang in 1965. So, for preliminary bombardment, we have a massive naval bombardment. This is actually an interesting note with this photograph here, actually. This is showing the battleship, I believe this is the USS Nevada, firing at targets during this operation to support the landings at Normandy. The USS Nevada is actually very famous for attempting to escape Pearl Harbor during the Japanese attack, although it was forced to ground itself due to heavy damage. It has been refloated and is now operational once again. It is joining with the battleship Texas to be the U.S. battleship force supporting the Normandy operation. So we have, oh, go ahead, Jason.
No, I was going to say the key is the preliminary bombardment doesn't do our guys a whole lot of good, but the Navy does when it comes to that close support during the actual invasion itself. We're going to find out how some of those destroyers did yeoman service. I guess that was anything more here?
So the main thing is that this huge bombardment is hoping to weaken or damage the defenses. However, it generally just doesn't work. The aerial bombardment has a tendency to fall too far inland and essentially dropping bombs on the farmland behind it, whereas the naval bombardment tends to fall short, and most of the shells and rockets that are being fired are mostly going into the channel.
So we killed a lot of cows.
Yes.
Alex, if you go to start. Okay, we're going to talk about Point to Hawk. This is a ranger operation here. We're not going to spend a lot of time on it because we're still trying to get to the beaches. We've been a little bit over an hour. Point to Hawk is it's a piece of high ground where the Germans have gun emplacements that can fire on Utah and Omaha Beach. U.S. Army Ranger Task Force is assigned the task of taking out these heavy guns. What are Rangers? Rangers are specially trained light infantry, all volunteers. They're trained to conduct raids. They're trained to think independently in small units. They're trained to move fast. Modeled after the British Commandos. 2nd Ranger Battalion, 5th Ranger Battalion, a task force is created. Lieutenant Colonel James Rudder, I believe, is given of the 2nd Rangers, is given the command at Point to Hawk. Basically, the concept of the operation is. Are there any bullet points here at all? I don't need a bullet. The concept of the operation is here. It's on top. Cliffs. The sea comes right up to cliffs. They're going to scale. They're going to land at the base of the cliffs, climb the cliffs, defeat the Germans. The Germans are kind of complacent here for two reasons. One, the seas are too rough. This is a bad weather period. The seas are too rough. No one's going to come along the sea today. And the Germans no one's going to be crazy enough to come up these cliffs. There's no reason for them to do that, so they're going to be looking inward to defend. That's not the case. How they do it is they have grappling hooks on the end of ropes that are with rocket charges. They have rocket launchers on the boats. They have rocket launchers, portable man-portable rocket launchers that they're going to take ashore. The first wave, they hit the beach there, and the Germans start firing on them from the cliffs. The Rangers are able to defeat those guys pretty quick because they can lay covering fire down from the boats, get them back from the cliff. The U.S. Navy is actually laying some effective fire now down on that cliff there. A lot of the rocket charges don't work because the ropes are waterlogged, but enough of them do, and the Rangers are able to start climbing up those cliffs. Now they've trained for this for months. Not only do they have ropes, they have 40-foot sections of ladders that they bring to kind of help them get up there. And they also have some 100-foot extension ladders from the London Fire Department, which I'll get to in a minute. So they land, they establish control on the beaches, they get enough ropes up there to start climbing, with the Germans firing down, trying to either cut the ropes, drop grenades down. But the Rangers move so fast that it's estimated within 5 minutes the first Rangers are near the top of those cliffs. and going over the top. Now, I talked about those 100-foot extension ladders. They mounted those on not the regular landing craft, but on ducks. We've all been to Wisconsin Dells. We've all seen the ducks, the amphibious trucks. The ducks don't work here very well because here the bombardment actually did mess up the beach. Part of the reason for the bombardment is they wanted to create craters for guys to take shelter on the beach. Not so much, it doesn't happen on Omaha Beach, but they definitely crater this beach. And that creates problems for the ducks. The ducks can't really move very well on the beach, so the ducks can't get up there and extend those ladders. There's a sergeant, the ranger sergeant, last name is Stevenson, I forget his first name. He decides he's going to put one of their machine guns to use. He has a machine gun on the top of one of those fire department 100-foot extension ladders, and they raise it up from the ducks so he can kind of try to provide some covering fire. But if you can imagine, I'm not a musician here, but that, the metronome, is that what you call it? Yeah. The thing? So imagine that. So he climbs up there trying to leave covering fire, but his ladder is going like this on the duck, back and forth. So and every time he kind of comes up, he's kind of spraying. But one thing he finds out is that moving targets attract what? Incoming fire. So as he's going like this, keeping beat to whatever music's in his head, German tracers are coming all around him. So he decides that that is not a good idea. As far as I know, Sergeant Stevenson survived that. But the Rangers do get up the cliff. They do get over the cliff. They start engaging the German garrison that is there, defeating them. What do they find? There are German defenders there. What they do not find are the heavy guns. The Germans, which our intelligence kind of feared had happened, had moved the guns off that site. They were inland. Did that mean this was a wasted mission? No. If you can move guns off, you can move guns forward. We still needed to control and seize this point of high ground. What the Germans did, though, the guns that were there were basically logs, wooden logs, which kind of took me back to, I guess, my area of specialty is the American Civil War, and it made me think of the Joseph Johnston in the 1862 Peninsula Campaign, where he had, to deceive General McClellan, he had put what they had called Quaker guns, which are basically just large logs in gun emplacements. So the Union general would think that there was a lot of guns that he was facing, but they're just logs. The Germans had the same thing up here at Pointe du Hoc. So that's essentially Pointe du Hoc in a nutshell. The follow-on Ranger forces did not have to call, and we're going to talk about Rangers a little bit more later on, but that's enough
this
points
photograph
off.
here, of course, takes place. This photograph was taken obviously once things were a little bit quieter, where we have some friendlies standing up above. But it still gives you kind of a good example of just having to climb that sheer cliff face under heavy fire. So now we're going to head over to Utah Beach. So there are two U.S. landing beaches. They are codenamed Utah and Omaha. So Utah Beach is going to be defended by soldiers of the 709th Static Infantry Division. This is, again, like we mentioned earlier, it's going to be mostly reservists, captured, outdated weapons. This photograph actually isn't Utah Beach, but it is kind of a good example of what we might be kind of looking at with the Atlantic Wall as well as these type of units, because that's actually a World War I FK-96 field gun that they have deployed there. The terrain at Utah is mostly flat, and this makes it difficult for the Germans to build good defensive positions, because there really aren't any points with good commanding views of what is going to be the battle area. It also is going to make it relatively easy for the invading forces to push inland, because the natural obstacles just quite simply are not there. And another quick note here is many of the defending troops there aren't even German, but they're actually Osttroppen, which are going to be conscripted men of mostly Eastern European, Russians and Poles predominantly, who are, they're very questionable reliability. And frankly, most of the stories that I've encountered from them are that they would usually take a couple of shots, frag their German officer, and surrender. So that's essentially how that really ended up playing out. It turns out that trying to take your enemies and give them firearms and throw them into the line was maybe not the best tactical choice. But such as it is.
Okay, I'm going to let Walter talk about Mr. Olson here, because he had interviewed him. Do we have Alvin Olson? He's our next local that we're going to talk about a little bit. Do we have any relatives, Alvin Olson's relatives here? Was your nephew able to make it?
No, he didn't.
Okay, because I was saying his grandnephew was also a military veteran, too bad he couldn't make it. I'll let Walter take over Mr. Olson.
All right, so Alvin Olson was born in Bemidji and moved to Ashland in his youth, and had been a member of the Civilian Conservation Corps before the war, which of course that's a famous program that was created by President Franklin Delano Roosevelt during the Great Depression era. And of course, to this day we can still find elements of the projects that were done in this area in some of our local parks and such like that. He entered service in 1937 and was a senior NCO by June of 1944. And he was, at this point, attached to the 4th Infantry Division, and he did land on Utah Beach on the morning of June 6th. He was, from what I can tell, he was an anti-tank gunner, was his specialty. And although he did survive the initial landings on Utah Beach, as the 4th Infantry Division pushed inland over the next few weeks, he was unfortunately killed in action on June 22nd of 1944. So, Utah Beach, the preliminary bombardments here are more successful. They still have a lot of the issues we have, but they're far more successful than they were at the other landing beach, specifically Omaha. Initial landings actually take place farther south than they were originally planned because of the heavy seas just drifting the boats out of their planned course. This actually works in the favor of the assault forces, however, because they actually drift away from the main German defenses and instead land in a much more weakly defended area. And the calmer seas also allow all of those amphibious tanks I mentioned earlier to land safely, which provides an invaluable level of support. And Brigadier General Teddy Roosevelt Jr., who is the son of President Theodore Roosevelt, also lands with his men and is famous for walking along the beach without any regard to enemy fire. And he had a very interesting quote in regard to how they had drifted off course and landed in kind of the wrong area. And I think Jason knows what that was.
Yep. Well, and I'll get to that quote in a second, but I do want to talk about Teddy here for a little bit. I think he's an interesting character. One of our assistant division commanders. I told you earlier that we're going to show that assistant division commanders were important on D-Day, and he's one of the reasons why. Brigadier General Teddy Roosevelt, son of a president, veteran of World War I. He was actually a victim of a gas attack in World War I. Had earned a Distinguished Service Cross in that First World War. Distinguished Service Cross is the second highest Medal of Valor given to American service members, just below the Medal of Honor. He was a reservist, so he wasn't full-time military. He was a reservist, went back into civilian life after World War I. He was actually a founder of the American Legion. So all you American Legion members out there, he's one of our founding legionnaires, Teddy. World War II came around, he went back into the service as a colonel, commanded the 26th Infantry Regiment, first saw combat in North Africa. And very quickly, he's a brigadier general. He's a brigadier general at Normandy. He has served as the assistant division commander of the 1st Infantry Division under Terry Allen. General Terry Allen, a soldier's general. The men of the Big Red One love him. The Big Red Ones are going to be hitting on Omaha Beach. But General Terry Allen is a little too unorthodox for his commanding general, General George Patton. And Teddy Roosevelt is a little too unorthodox and casual with guys for General George S. Patton. Both of them end up being relieved from their leadership position in the 1st Infantry Division, which does not endear the Big Red One to General Patton whatsoever, because they love General Allen and they love General Roosevelt. He had a reputation from the beginning of his time as being a general who is not a command post general. He's up in line, up on the front line with his troops. No one's ever going to use the nickname of Dugout Teddy with General Roosevelt. And if you're a military history nerd, that's funny, but if you know why that's funny, you know why it's funny. So come Normandy operation. He's again in the assistant division commander role, this time under Major General Barton, 4th Infantry Division. He's old, he walks with a cane, he's got health problems, he's the son of a president. They do not want him to go forward. Typically, the assistant division commanders are the ones going in with the invasion forces to do the forward command post. Division commanders are on the ships and they come in once things are a little bit established to push the divisions onward. He wants to go in with the invasion forces on that first wave. His division commander says, no, you're not. He's told no so many times, he has to do a written request explaining why he needs to be there on that first wave. He says, you're going to need information. You're going to need good intelligence. I know what information you need. The men are going to need to see me. The men are going to need motivation. This is not going to be like your other invasions. He's already been on 2 seaborne invasions. He gets his wish. He goes in with the first wave, not just early on, but in the first wave to hit the beach. He is the first general officer to have in the American Army whose boots touch France. And when he gets there, there is initial confusion at first. He's walking around with a cane and a .45 on the beach. He does a one-man reconnaissance of one of the draws, the exits off the beach. A general officer now. Now, when I was in Iraq, our generals were out of sight, out of mind. They definitely weren't boots on the ground. No offense, General. But no, so here you have this general officer doing a one-man reconnaissance with his cane and coming back and briefing the subordinate battalion commanders about what they're going to do. The soldiers saw him moving up and down the beach, and his leadership, motivating the soldiers, really drove a lot on the beach. And once we finish up with him, we're going to have to take and switch a battery. He ends up getting put in for the Distinguished Service Cross again for his actions on Utah Beach. Normandy campaign, he's put in for to command the 9th Division, gets his major generalship. Before that happens, though, his aide goes to wake him up. He dies of a heart attack in his truck. Never does get his major generalship. His DSC is upgraded to a Medal of Honor. Ends up being one of the few father and son Medal of Honor recipients, because his dad actually later got a Medal of Honor for his charge up San Juan Hill. We're not going to talk about the other father and son Medal of Honor team, even though they have a Wisconsin connection. So that Brigadier General Teddy Roosevelt, extremely influential. Hollywood kind of did a disservice to him, though, because they put his famous line, which was, they're off course, they're not in the right spot. He says, we're going to start the war from here. Famous line. They gave that to another division commander on another beach in the movie The Longest Day, so I think Hollywood kind of did wrong by him a little bit. But okay, we're going to move it on to Omaha Beach now. And while we're doing that, we're going to talk about another one of our Ashland connections, Walter Bud Kago. And to do that, I think Walter's a little better equipped to talk about this service member here. Walter?
I suppose so. So this is going to be my grandfather and actually my namesake. I am named after him. So this is Walter Kago. He served in the 234th Engineer Combat Battalion. And so this was an assault engineer unit. I'm going to get into that in a moment here. I'm going to get hit up on the slide.
Do you have any other family members here?
Yes, sir.
Any Kago relatives here?
A few Kegels, yep.
A few Kegos here? You're on the spot now, Walter.
All right, so he's actually one of 4 Kago brothers that served during the Second World War. Again, they're all from White River area. And so again, he was an amphibious assault engineer attached to the 234th Engineer Combat Battalion. So now this unit is actually rather interesting. They were actually the first to become amphibious assault engineers, and this is a very specialized unit that was created specifically for these type of beach landing operations to lead these invasions, to destroy obstacles and clear the way for the main invasion forces. So for this operation, the 234th is attached to the 29th Infantry Division and will be landing at Omaha Beach. This is actually the first of these units, and then was attached into what they reorganized as the Engineer Special Brigades. And they actually had spent their time in Britain training what would become the other amphibious assault engineer units, because again, they were the first to do so. Sorry, again, I thought I had another bullet. So, again, now he is my grandfather. I am named for him. And he actually had met a girl in London, and they had become engaged in the lead up to the invasion. So I don't have an enormous amount of information specifically as to what happened on the day of. So I know that the main point of the 234th Battalion actually landed on Omaha Beach on D+1, so June 7th. However, I have some information. I know that certain members, because they were so specialized, they were transferred temporarily. They were, the military phrase I believe is, they were OPCON, they were placed under operational control of other units, because again, they were the trainers. These were the guys that were considered to be experts in this type of operation. And I do have some evidence that he did participate in the assault landings, so I do believe that is what actually happened there. So he did land on June 6th on Omaha Beach as an assault engineer. And we're going to get into that shortly as well with Omaha. But Omaha Beach was particularly nasty. The engineer units actually were not able to fulfill their highly specialized job because of the sheer volume of German fire, and were thus forced to fight as infantry. The engineer units also suffered extreme casualties, and I'm trying to remember. I know there was an account of that where someone on the beach was asking, where are the engineers, because they want these things blasted, and the officer was pointed to where they were mostly dead in the surf. So I suppose now we can segue into the actual defenses at Omaha Beach. This is just a generic photograph of a German soldier from a battery somewhere along the Atlantic Wall. Unlike Utah, Utah Beach has steep bluffs. I'm sorry, mix things around. Unlike Utah, Omaha Beach has very steep bluffs. You have your beach, you have a seawall or a shingle, the shingle essentially being
sitting over there by the knees.
The seawall itself before you hit these steep bluffs. And this obviously provides with fantastic defensive positions for the Germans as opposed to the flat land of Utah. I mean, just trying to kind of, just a random thought here. Imagine that you're trying to, here in Ashland, imagine that you're trying to land here and the terrain, compare the terrain at Sandbar versus the terrain over by Crair, where you have a steep hill right behind it. It's kind of like that, although it's much steeper at Omaha. So these positions are manned by the 352nd Infantry Division, which, like we mentioned earlier, this is a regular frontline German infantry unit. This is not the unreliable foreign conscripts and tired reservists that are being encountered elsewhere. The terrain itself is a crescent shape with steep rocky bluffs, which can actually reach up as high as 150 feet in some places, and these are lined with defensive positions. There are several draws, which essentially are slightly less steep areas that one can use to get up off the beach. These have all been covered by German strong points.
It is heavily mined. A very heavily mined area. A lot of that accounts we read, the soldiers had to go like single file making their way through some of these heavily mined fields. Even the obstacles were mined. You hear about the soldiers that are taking cover on the beach, or what cover there was, and the Germans were firing over them. Why are they firing over them? They're trying to hit the mines on top of the obstacles there. Some of the other obstacles, one of the reasons that we're coming in at low tide is to give the coxswains in the landing craft the ability to see the obstacles, which also have mines on them, to get around them. Once that water starts coming up, they're not going to be able to see those obstacles, and they're going to be hitting those mines, hitting those obstacles. You want the next slide? And, yep.
All right.
The salt waves are coming in. They're getting on the crafts around 4:30 in the morning. H hours right around 6:30. Again, the plan is tanks hit the beach first, and the infantry using the tanks as cover. They have landing craft that have rocket batteries on them. A lot of the troops saw the rockets launched and saw the rockets hit the water. Rockets didn't really do anything. And like I said, no German emplacements are significantly damaged by any of the bombardments. Everything is beyond the beach, beyond the emplacements, or short, far short.
The landing begins at 06:30 hours. That is H hour on Omaha Beach. And I just want to bring that up because actually in some of the German reports, German batteries were reporting back to their headquarters that they were undamaged and ready for action approximately 4 minutes before the first landing craft actually hit the beach.
And like I said, you know, how intense the fire, the machine gun fire here is so intense. They have the whole beach covered by enfilade, which means that they can fire down the length of the beach. They have pre-sighted mortars. Mortars did a lot of damage here because we talk about that big seawall, the bluff they're up against. Even when the troops were cowering, taking cover there, the Germans were still dropping mortars. There was like a line of like rock shingle on that beach, and when the mortars hit that, all it does is create more shrapnel. Not a lot, world of difference from any other of the beaches.
We had also mentioned earlier about the significant overweight of the load carried by many of these men, because a sandbar ends up catching a lot of these landing craft as they're coming in. And this is a serious problem. Now, some of the more experienced operators of these craft are able to, because there is a way to get over it by, essentially by playing with the throttle to create a wake that'll push you over it, if they know it's there and if they're experienced enough to know how to do that. But a lot of them are getting stuck, so they're not only are they farther out, but they're in actually relatively deep water. So these guys are very overloaded. They step off the landing craft and they sink like rocks.
Which is poor planning, poor execution. Your assault troops should be light and be able to move fast. No one was light and able to move fast.
No,
we're going to talk about another company's landing. We'll go in a little more detail on what they're going through. But first, we're going to move on to another one of our local service members, Eugene Bud Brinker from Ashland here. We have some relatives here. John, do you have anyone else? Yeah, Eugene himself is here. Thank you. His namesake nephew is here. Eugene Brinker came from a family. There's you're not correct me if I get any of this wrong from memory, but 4 brothers, right? Oh. 4 brothers, 3 sisters, all in the service. Mary Ellen Brinker is a widow. That's the mom. She enlisted in the Army in 1940. First duty station, Mountain, California. He served in the Presidio. When he enlisted and left for basic training, he never came back to Ashland. So that's the last time someone of his family saw him before he went off to war. He was initially in the 7th Infantry Division, as you can tell by the top of his patch there. He ended up in the Big Red 1, the 1st Infantry Division. He had combat in North Africa where he was wounded, and a buddy of his was captured by the Germans. He had combat in Sicily with the 1st Infantry Division. The Big Red 1, they were in the action from the beginning. One general officer said that the 1st Infantry Division, the attitude of the Big Red 1 is that the United States Army consists of the 1st Division and 10 million replacements and support soldiers. So they're carrying a big load. 1943, they're pulled out of Sicily, sent to England to train up for another invasion. So you have these tired soldiers of they probably had the most combat in the European theater already, and they're expected to lead another invasion of another coast. Soldiers aren't very happy. They're not very happy because General Patton took away their beloved General Terry Allen. So they're kind of disgruntled and unhappy. Major General Hubner is put in command of them. Excellent officer, not received very well because of who he replaced. The soldiers don't really give him a lot of respect until after D-Day. But we're not talking about him, we're talking about Private First Class Brinker.
Which actually, I'm just going to throw out a correction here.
Oh,
my apologies on that. Some wires got crossed with one of our others. He was not a senior NCO. He was a private first class. So that's my mistake. I was looking at the wrong notes when I proofread this.
I didn't even look at the bullet points. I just wanted to do that.
Just want to issue that correction. That's on me, and I apologize.
So, Private First Class Brinker is in the 16th Infantry Regiment, 1st Infantry Division, first wave coming towards the beach in that morning. A friend of his, Billy Little, I think we had said, was in another landing craft. And they were described, he could see Bud's landing craft. One moment it's there, the next time he looked over, it's gone, nothing but smoke and fire. The supposition is German artillery hit his landing craft, killed everyone on it. Private Brinker, after 2 campaigns, by his 3rd campaign, ends up coming home in a sealed casket to his family. Again, he had left all 4 brothers and all of his brother-in-laws were in the military. So the entire family was in the service. So a sacrifice at D-Day. We're going to talk about his home family a little bit too. Like I said, that he had his mother, Mary Ellen, was a widow. And she had 3 daughters that were without their husbands here too, because all the male members of the family were gone overseas. World War II, right after the Great Depression, families are still suffering. They have to kind of pull together to survive themselves, because they still have to make do. They still have to survive the people back home. So all the daughters moved back home with Mary Ellen Brinker. What was her nickname? I'm sorry, John.
Nellie.
Nellie?
Nellie.
Nellie. Brinker. So everyone moves back home. The oldest daughter, Kathleen, his oldest sister, Kathleen, ends up kind of being the matriarch, kind of keeping that household together. She was a hairdresser, and she had actually owned her own hair salon, House of Beauty, in 2nd Street. I don't know how long it was in operation for. Does anyone remember the House of Beauty in the 200 block across from the courthouse? Okay, a few people do. That was the original owner for that was his sister, Kathleen or Catherine?
Catherine.
Catherine, thank you. So she was kind of like the matriarch, kind of paid a lot of the bills, was kind of the breadwinner for the Brinker family while the men were overseas. So, yeah. And again, you want to learn more about Private Brinker and his experiences. John and his cousin, Bud, is the namesake of his uncle. We did an oral history with them, and they're also on YouTube and our Facebook pages. So you can learn more about the Brinker family and what they had gone through. We're going to talk a little bit about some key officers on Omaha Beach and why we succeeded at Omaha Beach. Leadership was essential to make this happen. Omaha Beach was the hardest beach out of all these beaches. This is almost where Ramos succeeded in beating us at the shoreline. What we're looking at now, this is Colonel, he's a general there. Colonel George Taylor was a regimental commander of the 16th Infantry, which Private Brinker was a member of. He is considered one of the essential leaders that helped stabilize and win that beach. He is famous for when he had landed. He landed about an hour after the initial waves were, to find that the soldiers of the first ID were they're demoralized, they were pinned down, they were leaderless, they were scattered. There was no plan of action, there was no initiative. He moved up and down, exposing himself to fire, chastising soldiers, motivating soldiers, doing what he had to do to get soldiers to move. His famous line was, the only people on this beach are the dead and those about to die. If you're going to die, die inland. And that was enough to kind of motivate a lot of soldiers. And he's considered one of the key officers moving soldiers off the beach. I think he got a Distinguished Service Cross. I'm positive he got a Distinguished Service Cross for his leadership on Omaha Beach. This is the Assistant Division Commander, Wyland. God, I keep messing up his name. Well, yes. He also had landed there. He also is considered. Many 1st Infantry Division soldiers credit him with actually winning the beach. He said if it wasn't for the Assistant Division Commander, we would have lost that beach. The same thing while Colonel Taylor was doing it on one end, General Willem was doing it on the other end. The biggest thing they were doing was exposing themselves to fire and moving, getting soldiers to move. You stay stationary, you're going to die, because even if you're behind cover, the German mortars are killing soldiers. But they said a lot of them got to the seawall and stopped. And that doesn't do them any good. So general officers did have an impact on that day. And he was one of those. You have nothing? Okay, I guess we lost some of our sound there, sorry. We're supposed to have some fancy sound effects here, but we're going to move on now. We're going to talk about another key company, a very important part of Omaha Beach. One of the things that made Omaha Beach so hard, we had 300 yards of beach to get across. It was heavily obstacled. The Germans had pre-sighted clear fields of fire for their machine guns, and they were dug in hard. None of their positions were severely damaged by any of the naval gunfire, and it was heavily mined. excuse me. One of the units they hit it. The 1st Infantry Division had the left flank of Omaha Beach. The regiment of the 29th Division, a National Guard division, had the right flank. We're going to talk about one unit from them to kind of illustrate the soldiers' experience there. Company A of the 116th Infantry. It's a Virginia National Guard unit. It has a heritage that goes all the way back to Virginia as a colony. It has a heritage that goes back to the Civil War. Their fathers and grandfathers wore gray uniforms and fought under Stonewall Jackson. They were part of the famous Stonewall Brigade. That's why the 29th Division, they have a blue and gray patch. It's a circle patch, kind of like that yin and yang symbol. To symbolize units on both sides of Mason-Dixon. They have units from Maryland, Pennsylvania, Virginia. So that's why they have that blue and gray patch. But now, the company of the 116th, a lot of their guys had joined the National Guard from their hometown in Bedford, Virginia in the 30s during the Depression. They got that $1 for a drill meeting every Monday night at the Armory. That was money that they needed. They got activated in 1940. For about a year before the war, the United States had federalized a significant part of the National Guard for a year of training to get them ready for a possible war. They never left active duty because the war started. 1942, the 29th Division, aboard the Queen Mary, was sent to England. They hadn't hit combat yet, but they had witnessed a severe loss of life. We talked about the Slaps and Sands operation exercise when we lost hundreds and hundreds of American service members. The 29th Division, the 116th Infantry in particular, crossing on the Queen Mary, they had an escort, a British destroyer escort. Queen Mary was a huge ship, fast. The destroyers had a hard time keeping up with it. It ended up colliding with one of their destroyer escorts, the HMS Curaçao. I can't pronunciation. Curaçao goes down within minutes. I believe like 350 some British sailors are dead in one incident. And a lot of these guys saw that. They hadn't even gotten to a combat zone yet. Another incident of government secrecy. I don't think the families knew the whole truth till well after the war of what happened to their service members. Can you imagine 300 to 400 service members dying in one incident and you as a family member not knowing what happened to your service member? They arrive in England and they train. They're given responsibilities for coastal defense. They're jokingly called by other army units part of the English Army because they spent so much time in England. They actually are called England's own. One kind of humorous story. One of the properties that they're staying at, there's a English lady that married into a fancy family. She's actually from Virginia, and she's all excited to have some of these National Guardsmen from Virginia there. But after a time, American GIs are American GIs, and they get their passes. They're going to town. They're being rowdy. They're being obnoxious. They're drinking a lot because what's the saying over there? The American soldiers are overpaid. They're paid a lot more than the British soldier. Overpaid, oversexed, and over here. Well, they pretty much made that true. And the lady, I forget her name, but she had, because she had family ties to Virginia, she actually asked some of the officers of this unit, when you guys go to town on pass, please tell them you're from New York. Because I tell everyone that soldiers from Virginia aren't obnoxious and they don't act like that.
To throw out an interesting local tidbit in all that as well, to show that that's just a fact of life. There actually was a German prisoner of war camp, well, American prisoner of war camp for German prisoners actually at Bayfield. And during this period, it's actually interesting because the records that exist from the Sheriff's Department are that the prisoners themselves never really caused any issues. However, the military police that guarded the camp when they were on their furloughs that's another story.
Company A is commanded by a guy by the name of Captain Taylor Fellers. He's from one of the more well-off families from his colony back in Virginia. He joined the National Guard in 1932, rose rapidly through the ranks. His dad was a county administrator. He was a supervisor of the highway department, Captain Fellers was. He ended up being the company commander for these guys. The bulk of the unit, by this time, right before D-Day, the bulk of the unit had been a lot of replacements. Guys, unfit for duty out. So there's a lot of people from outside of their area in here. But the core of the unit is still Bedford, Virginia. And Captain Fellers knows that he has to take care of these guys because what's going to happen to me when I go home and I don't bring some of these guys home to their family. So the core of the unit is still Bedford, Virginia. So Captain Fellers is told that he is in his company, Company A of the 116th, first wave, the far right flank of Omaha Beach. His guys are going to be the first ones. These Virginia National Guardsmen are going to be the first ones that hit that beach on the right side of the 1st Infantry Division. So we're going to kind of, I'm going to see if I can paint as good a mental picture as Walter does here. They're on their troop ship. They get woken up. They start loading their landing craft, their LCAs, not the Higgins boats you all know. They're a little bit bigger. There's so many different kinds of landing crafts. But they're loading up their LCAs and departing their troop ships about 4:30 in the morning. They hit their 6:30 beach landing. About 30 men in a boat crew. So you got a 2-hour ride on very rough seas. Because remember, this is a bad weather period. Eisenhower is just sneaking this invasion in. So whatever greasy Navy breakfast you had, if you ate it at all, is churning in your stomach. You either have an empty stomach or you got a lot of grease and coffee in your stomach. 2 hours on rough seas, you're smelling that, the fuel from the boats that are getting to you, seasickness. All of a sudden guys start vomiting all over the place and that's contagious. So you got 2 hours of that. And then wondering what's going on. Your leadership has told you that the Air Force and the Navy is going to do such a job that you guys are going to walk off the boats and walk up to destroyed positions and lay down and have control of the beach. Now, Captain Fellers did not believe that. Captain Fellers was optimistic until about 2 or 3 weeks before D-Day, when all of a sudden his soldiers had noticed a change in his demeanor. He's starting to get a lot more, not more serious, he was a serious commander, but a lot more pessimistic, nervous. So the soldiers weren't sure what to expect. Not a lot of them, they weren't sure to believe that the Navy was going to do that good. They were hoping it would. They saw the rocket ship. These guys saw the rocket ships fire, and they saw the rockets hit the water. I think that didn't do their confidence a whole lot of good. They hit the beach. We've all seen the movies and stuff where the ramps come down and they're instantly machine gunning the boat. That didn't happen to Company A. Company A, again, that far right boat of Task Force 16, they're under the temporary control of the 1st Infantry Division. The doors open up, no machine gun fire, their part of the beach is quiet. Captain Fellers leads his men off. They're on the beach, they're taking positions, they can see the German positions, but nothing's happening right now. That doesn't last very long. German machine guns open up once they exit the boat. 30 men are in that first boat. 6 boats bring in Company A. Only 5 made it because 1 went down in the channel. 30 men leave Captain Feller's boats, hit the ground, no one's firing at them. Within 2 minutes, his entire boat crew is dead. Because the Germans open up, they have nowhere to go. There is no armor on the beach. The armor sank in the channel. The armor didn't make it. There are no tanks for cover. There are no craters on the beach to take cover. There's nothing but mines and German obstacles and nothing but the solid wall of machine gun fire and mortar fires. So 30 men are dead in less than 2 minutes. Within 7 minutes, it is estimated that 80% of Company A is out of action, either killed or not in a condition to fight. I mean, I don't know. I mean, I've read that book. I can't even imagine that type of environment. By the end of D-Day, 8 members of a 200-man rifle company are in fighting shape after the end of 1 day. And you can imagine what happens to this small town. Think of a town a little bit bigger than Washburn. I think Bedford's wartime population was about 3,000. Now, everyone kind of came from around, but it was a community, whether they came from outside in the rural areas or not. The Normandy invasion took 22 lives from one town about the size of Washburn in pretty much 1 day. Can you imagine how those telegrams started coming in? Because that's how they delivered it, by telegrams. And it wasn't like, you see, like Saving Private Ryan, we were soldiers. The notices are getting to the families while the battle is going on. Those notices weren't getting to the families until July, almost August. And how it happened was, small town, I forget her name, but there's a lady in town that works at the little one of the, I don't know if you call them drugstore at the time, but they were the telegraph station in the back. She reports to work might be about 2 months, maybe a month and a half after D-Day. A lot of the families are wondering because letters have stopped coming. All of a sudden some families start getting letters sent back. So families are starting to get a little nervous. We're not hearing anything. What's going on? One day, late summer, this girl that works at the telegraph office at the drugstore reports to duty, turns on her telegraph, tells her other sending station that she's on duty, and all of a sudden it starts coming in, that starts the line, the Secretary of War regrets to inform you, oh, here it comes, and it doesn't stop. It keeps coming, it keeps coming, it keeps coming. Like a whole stack of them in this one day, and she doesn't know what to do. And she's actually asking for volunteers because she doesn't want, you deliver one and the word starts going out and stuff like that. So it took generations for that town to recover from that shock. So there's no wonder why Bedford, Virginia is the home. It's the site of the National D-Day Memorial, because per capita that community had the greatest loss of life on D-Day for everyone. So if you hear about the Bedford boys, they're referring to Company A of the 116th. And like I said, 2 minutes after the ramps opened, that entire first boat was dead. And I think I'm kind of lost the track. So that was Omaha Beach and part of our experience there. Before we go on to British-Canadian landing, because we're done talking about the American forces. We still have a couple family members to talk about. I'm just going to touch on real quick a follow-up on the Rangers. Who all here has seen Saving Private Ryan, the movie? One of the criticisms I had heard about the movie was that the main characters were hitting Omaha Beach and they were part of the 2nd Ranger Battalion. And I've had guys tell me, well, everyone knows Rangers hit Point to Hawk, they weren't landing. Actually, that was actually somewhat accurate, because more Rangers hit Omaha Beach than hit Point to Hawk. One Ranger company, Company C, 2nd Rangers, which was actually the name of the company in the movie. Tom Hanks wasn't there though. Actually, they were specifically assigned to Omaha Beach. They were, Company A, who I just talked about, was the right hand of the 1st Infantry Division Task Force. Company C of the 2nd Rangers was to their immediate right flank. And their job was not so much to work with them and to help take the beach, but there was to land there, climb that seawall, and come at Point to Hawk from the rear. So we did have one Ranger company assigned in the first wave to Omaha Beach. They had it rough too. The difference with them is they are higher trained, despite all the training that the 116th had. Rangers have a higher level of training, and they were said to have moved with a lot faster purpose across that beach. They didn't get bogged down as fast. But they still took 50% casualties before they got to the seawall. The second wave of Rangers of the 2nd and 5th Battalion that were set to hit Point to Hawk were diverted to Omaha Beach. So multiple Ranger companies landed at Omaha at the beach. So that's we'll go on to there. We're going to touch on the British and Canadians.
All right, so the British and Canadians, they have their own 3 beaches. The British are landing at Golden Sword, and the Canadians are landing at Juneau, which is right in the middle of that. There are actually a couple of seaside towns in Juneau, and it actually leads to urban combat once they actually enter that town. Golden Sword also see heavy action, although the British tanks are able to get ashore in force, which is a deciding factor in ensuring that the British landings are successful. Now their beaches are just the first steps, as the city of Caen is the primary objective, because of course, again, as the city, this is the major road and railway hub of the region. However, the German defense there is very efficient, and they do get bogged down there actually for a very long time. Breaking out to secure the beachhead. As the landing forces take the beaches themselves and begin to push inland, the German resistance does continue. German artillery at Breakport Manor does present a significant obstacle firing onto Utah Beach. This is until they are silenced by paratroopers from the Easy Company of the 506th Parachute Infantry Regiment, 101st Airborne Division. This is the famous Band of Brothers.
And the one comment I can make on Breakport Manor, this is I was going to have a whole thing on Breakport Manor, but obviously we can't talk about it. The one thing I'm going to mention on here was if you watch that one episode of Band of Brothers, they got so many things right in that miniseries, more things right than wrong. Easy Company's actions and their leadership at Breakcourt Manor is still talked about today. Army leadership manuals still highlight Lieutenant Winters and his officers. Well, back when I was still in the Army 15 years ago, it was in the leadership manual what they did at Breakcourt Manor.
And it's also just an interesting little side note that actually I was made aware of by our friends at the Bayfield Heritage Association, that a member of Easy Company 506, a veteran thereof, although one who had joined after Normandy, actually used to spend his summers up here in the Schwamigan Bay area, operating his boat airborne out of the city of Washburn.
Yeah, his name was Herb Swerth, and he was a part of the Band of Brothers.
Okay, supporting the invasion real quick. I'm just going to touch on LST landing ship tanks real quick. We want to get on to some of our last Asher ones. You can see right there, those are the landing ship tanks in there. Those are the big, can cross the ocean, carry large tons of equipment. Some historians will say that the Higgins boat won the war. There's others, and I'm going to use Craig Simmons as an example. He's a historian emeritus, I think that's how you pronounce it, from the U.S. Naval Academy. And he has made and his statement is that the LSTs actually won the war. And I'm going to kind of agree with his kind of line of thinking, because yes, the Higgins boat brought personnel and some individual vehicles on shore. The LSTs transported large quantities of troops and large quantities of vehicles and big vehicles, because we don't have a harbor yet. We don't have a port to drop stuff on. So these ships are designed to come up onto the beach, drop their ramps. They have tanks and tanks in the take deck, vehicles on the top. Walter and I, as part of our research, went and visited the last surviving LST, which is LST 325, which was in D-Day. And just an example of some of their service, what they did. They hit the beach on D+1, bringing in, you know, an engineer unit and a naval construction battalion, and they made multiple. They're just constantly cycling back and forth to England, bringing troops and vehicles in, and bringing POWs and casualties back. And the key is bringing troops and vehicles in, because now that we have the bridgehead, we need to expand it and keep pushing troops in, keep pushing vehicles in.
So as mentioned there, just real quick too, major problem is the lack of a port facility. So floating prefabricated harbor sections, defined as mulberries, were brought in to essentially convert the Normandy beaches into a temporary harbor. This is not a permanent solution, but it is something to allow this to come forward. Because, quite frankly, what really is probably the single most deciding factor in the victory in the Second World War is the absolutely astonishing level of American industrial output. And being able to bring this ashore, to be able to support an army that rapidly swells to over 1 million, and to be able to do this while running operations around the world like this is really quite astonishing. And this is the type of logistical support that is required to support. The type of logistical support required to operate an army of this size is really quite staggering.
Okay, we're going to move on to our next Ashland native, Ragnar Lindstrom. Now, some of you may get confused, and when you hear the name Ragnar, think of, my understanding of Norse mythology is correct, because Ragnar was the grandfather of Thor, the god of thunder. Not the case here, not this guy. This is actually the uncle to our Historical Society president, Bryce O'Shane, and the father to her 2 cousins. Are both your cousins here?
Yeah.
These are names, right? Esther Pufall and Joanne Swanson. Are you both here? Okay. So his 2 daughters and his niece are here. So it is not Thor's grandfather. Well, he was in the artillery though.
True enough.
So and Thor was the god of thunder. So maybe there's a connection there. I don't know. Tori, you're gonna have to check Ancestry.com. So there's a little. Like I said, you thought dad jokes were bad. Anyways, Ragnar was is that how you pronounce it, Ragnar? He's an artilleryman with the 552nd Field Artillery Regiment, which landed on July 4th. He's one of those follow-on forces that probably came across in one of those LSTs and came upon that established beach. He was a member of the 8th Infantry Division and immediately went into operations into the
Cotentin Peninsula.
Cotentin Peninsula. They're really
and they were driving through what is known as the Bocage country. This is basically farmland. The fences weren't really a thing. Instead, we have extremely dense hedgerows, which makes for very difficult military operations. These are dense enough you can have German units on one side of the hedgerows, American units on the other. Don't even know each other are there. It requires actually using beach obstacles. They take beach obstacles and convert them into blades by cutting them out, mounting them onto the front of tanks to drive through these hedgerows. And this results in a nasty slog as they move through, pushing up the Cotentin Peninsula toward the port of Cherbourg as well as the port of Brest.
And this is another intelligence failure on Allied intelligence because, again, our aircraft took excellent photographs of the Bocage country and stuff, and they saw they did not realize the height and thickness and strength of those hedgerows. So it took the American Army by surprise when they hit them. They thought they could just drive their tanks right through them, and they're just like going, squeezing through brush. It wasn't. A significant action that the 8th Infantry Division was in was the seizure and the capture of the port city of Brest. And one thing that's kind of noticeable about that is that action earned the 8th Infantry Division their nickname. By this time, that General Carnam, who was the 16th Regimental Colonel, remember him, I talked about him a little bit, he was so instrumental, earned the Distinguished Service Cross on Omaha. He is now a Brigadier General as the Assistant Division Commander in charge of the 8th Infantry Division. When they capture Brest, he meets with the German commander to take the surrender. Germans are always a little more formal than the Americans. And the German general who's going to surrender asked Brigadier General Carnam, who was of a lower rank than him, for his credentials. Are you somebody worthy for me to surrender to? Well, General Carnam just stands there, got a whole slew of dirty, crusty, probably half-shaven American infantrymen behind him and said, "Here are my credentials." German surrendered.
So again, for subsequent operations, despite how the effectiveness of the Mulberry Harbors, they still need a major deep water port. Cherbourg on the Cotentin Peninsula is the primary objective to that. They do push through the Bocage and successfully isolate the peninsula before driving up it. They are able to capture Cherbourg by the end of July. However, the Germans do a lot of damage to the port facilities before they are defeated, and the port will not actually be operational until September. British and Canadian forces also end up stalled around Caen against strong Panzer forces, and the city actually does not fall until the end of July. And remember, Caen is actually not far in from the beaches, so this is a significant obstacle.
Mine didn't always move that fast.
Our photograph here, of course, very famous photograph after the collapse of the German resistance at Cherbourg, marching POWs out of the city.
One thing, Bernard Montgomery, Americans said that he moved too slow. Montgomery would later say that his job was just to pin down the Germans and not advance and let the Americans advance.
So, the beachhead has been established, so now the next thing is to break out of that beachhead and begin pushing into the French heartland. So this commences with Operation Cobra at the end of July. After the fall of Caen, the British also commence a drive inland. The Germans do muster up their forces and they launch a major counterattack around the town of Mortain. This fails, and disastrously so, resulting in them being trapped in what is known as the Falaise Pocket, as they are on the brink of being enveloped. Essentially, this would mean they basically find themselves caught in a pincer, and they begin rapidly trying to evacuate from the area around Falaise through the town of Chambois. However, they are not able to get out of Chambois before the British and American forces link up. This results in the destruction of the German 7th Army, which results in pretty much the annihilation of the combat power of the Wehrmacht in northern France.
And during this breakout, we're going to go back to Apprentice's family again. That's used that 9th Troop Carrier Command. The American Army is moving so fast, they're using up all their fuel. The 9th Troop Carrier Command was famous for basically what they were doing. They were flying plane loads of gasoline, trying to keep up with the American forces to keep all those fast-moving forces fueled up and on. There's actually in that scrapbook that that his grandson has, they actually have a newspaper article where they talk about that, how all the gallons of gas that they're delivering to the forces that are moving so fast.
So, the closure of the Falaise pocket results in the destruction of the German army in northern France. This totals 40 divisions. This is an enormous number of troops. I always forget my numbers. Jason knows just the rough of how much a division usually is in strength.
A rifle company is 200. Over there. Okay. Thousands.
So, it's an enormous number of men. A field army is the second largest formation that any armed force will put onto the field. So, this is an enormous, enormous victory. Despite receiving orders from Hitler, the German garrison in the French capital elects to not turn the city into another Stalingrad. Instead, some resistance is offered, but by and large the city falls with minimal damage as they surrender, and most German forces are left to retreat back eastward toward their own homeland. And with that, the Normandy campaign is considered complete.
One more Ashland connection. We have a Britisher here, an English woman here, and again, I'm going to pass this off to my partner Walter to kind of explain who Miss Farmer is and why we have her up on our board.
Yes. So, I had mentioned earlier when I talked about my grandfather, Walter Kegel, that he had become engaged to a woman in London during his furloughs before the invasion. So, that would be Miss Elizabeth Farmer of Shoreditch. So, born and raised in London by 1944, she's working in a factory and producing parts for Sten submachine guns. She met Walter while she was actually out to see a movie. They went out and saw Casablanca together. And by the end of the weekend, they were engaged, with Walter's mother, Clara Kegel, actually mailing an engagement ring over from here, that ring actually having been returned by someone else before that because she didn't want to be with a soldier.
Oh, engaged after the weekend? Wasn't that a little... Yeah, that...
Perhaps a little bit forward. Her diary may perhaps mention someone else being a little bit too forward and getting engaged to her GI fiance a little bit too quickly, but...
Longer than that one. Walter, was she a nurse at Memorial Medical Center?
I was, yep,
Yes, I
she worked at MMC and St. Joseph's.
And one thing I find extremely interesting is Walter has never seen Casablanca himself.
So, just another interesting story there is that she was rather confused and wondering what was going on because her letters were going unanswered for quite some time. And she didn't find out until much later because, like everyone who went over for the invasion, there was essentially a communications blackout. So nothing was coming through. So essentially, he was getting all these letters and they were being held. All of his responses were being held. So eventually she started getting a bunch of letters that started to make everything start to go forward on that. But one can imagine how that would have felt, that you're just suddenly not getting your responses anymore. And this is before the invasion, mind you, but still, suddenly you're not hearing anymore. So that's gotta raise some questions there. But it all worked itself out, and he managed to survive the war, continued on, and throughout and ended the war on the Elbe, one of the farthest American advances into Germany with his unit. And then they were married shortly after the war. She came here ahead of him, and they lived a good long life here.
I think we'll move through these kind of quick. They're about 2 hours and 20 minutes.
Yep.
So we're still shorter than the movie Saving Private Ryan. I'll go through these really fast and see how fast Walter can talk.
Okay, so now just to follow what happens, we have Operation Bagration that happens in the Eastern Front concurrently to this. This is actually the largest ground defeat the Germans are going to sustain during the entire war. The entirety of Army Group Center is enveloped and destroyed by the Soviet Army. Operation Market Garden, September 1944. This is Montgomery's plan to end the war by Christmas with an ambitious paratrooper attack, basically launching and attacking to secure a route of travel directly into the German heartland through Holland. It is a disastrous failure and results in large amounts of, particularly the British airborne, being
Pretty much they went a bridge too far, right?
You can just put it that way, yes. October 1944, the Battle of Aachen. This is the first German city to fall to any of the Allied powers during the Second World War. Notably, it was the United States 1st Infantry Division, which we've been talking about already at Omaha Beach. They're the ones that were primarily responsible for the capture of Aachen. The Battle of the Ardennes, December 1944. This is more commonly known as the Battle of the Bulge. Hitler orders essentially the last of his remaining forces that are at full strength to launch an offensive into the Ardennes forest with the objective of pushing to the Belgian port of Antwerp, hoping that this will break the Western Allies. Despite initial success,
for my wife and sister and cousin, Rug Lindstrom won a Silver Star at the Battle of Bulge.
Thank you. I think I forgot to mention that he did earn the Silver Star there too. He had Bronze Star and his Silver Star during his time in Europe. Yes.
thank you. Yes, actually, and Walter Kegel was there as well. Crossing the Rhine, March 1945, the securing of the Ludendorff Bridge over the Rhine River at Remagen. This is the last major land obstacle before getting into the German heartland. The capture of this bridge and Allied forces beginning to force the river essentially is the end of major resistance on the Western Front, with the exception of the industrialized Ruhr region. So aside from the forces that are dealing with the German forces in that pocket, the bulk of the Western armies begin essentially a rapid-fire race across the country, trying to reach the demarcation line with the Soviets along the River Elbe. And April 1945, the fall of Germany. By the time that everything comes to a head, April 16th, 1945, the city of Berlin is sandwiched between the American 9th Army, which is waiting on the Elbe, and the massive Soviet forces, which consist of 3 army groups on the Eastern Front, which converge upon the city and destroy it in an apocalyptic final battle, which results in the complete destruction of the Third Reich and the end of the Second World War in Europe, with the German surrender following in May.